Hey, what is going on, guys? It's Arya back again. Yesterday, the gameplay trailer for 9 was released. If you haven't watched it, I will link it in the description down below. You can watch it in its entirety, and I will also probably make another video talking about my thoughts and opinions about it, but today I want to talk about something that was shown in the trailer, and it's kind of confusing the community, and I thought I would make a video and explain what's going on. In this trailer, we see that some of our characters die. We see Bruno die, and we see Shaw get wrecked by this boss zombie and his body gets thrown in a ditch. And a lot of people are confused by this. They're thinking, well, these are our main characters. How could they possibly die? Is Treyarch trolling again? What's going on? And to answer that question, I'm gonna refer to the interview that Game Informer did with Jason Blundell a few days ago. In that interview, Jason Blundell was talking about the differences between the Ether story and the Chaos story. He says that in the Ether story, they tried to put a zombies outbreak twist on real historical events, and they're gonna do the same thing in the Chaos story as well. But the main difference is that if there was a real zombies outbreak like the one in the Ether story, all the governments in the world would be aware of that, and that itself would change the course of history as we know it. For example, if there was a huge zombies outbreak in World War I, there's a very good chance that World War II wouldn't happen, because all the governments in the world would probably band together and try to fight the zombies outbreak, because if they didn't, the human race would probably become extinct. So since the zombies outbreak changes the entire history, then there is a very good chance that most international conflicts and historical events wouldn't take place. So Treyarch wouldn't feel confident enough putting a zombies twist in something real that actually happened in the past. So what they're doing in the Chaos story is looking at a certain historical event that is somewhat isolated from the rest of the world, and it's somewhat contained, and it has a very clear beginning and a very clear end to it. And it takes place in a time in history where they couldn't record things like that. For example, the Titanic. There's a very clear beginning and an end to it. The Titanic takes off and it sinks. What Jason Blundell is doing is saying, well, what if there was a zombies outbreak in the Titanic? First of all, it would be difficult to dispute that because no one recorded it. And second of all, when you really think about it, a zombies outbreak inside the Titanic would make no difference to the rest of the world, because whether there were zombies in the Titanic or not, the ship still sinks and people still die. This kind of zombies outbreak would not change the course of history because it's isolated from the rest of the world. All the major conflicts and historical events would still happen, so Treyarch could then later on in the future use those actual historical events as elements in their storyline. They did this so that our understanding of history is preserved. They did this so they can confidently combine real-life elements with mythology, zombies, and science fiction. Because when you look at the Ether storyline, it was getting harder and harder to keep it in a science fact format. So in order to explain some of the craziness that happens inside the storyline, they had to introduce things like Dr. Monty, or the Apothecons, or the Keepers. Because the story has plot holes, and they can't really explain some of the things in the story without having ambiguous characters with ambiguous powers like Dr. Monty or the Shadow Man. Those characters can be used to fill up some plot holes or answer some questions that otherwise would either be impossible or very difficult to answer. It's not the best form of storytelling considering how the whole narrative goes from science fact to science fiction, but Treyarch gets a pass on this because Jimmy Zielinski was the main director for Treyarch Zombies until sometime in the middle of Black Ops 2's life cycle, and he's responsible for some of the bigger plot holes and mysteries that are difficult to answer. And when he left, Jason Blundell stepped in and he basically had this gigantic mess of a storyline in front of him, and he was given one of the most difficult jobs in the world, which would be to make sense of the zombie storyline, answer some questions and fill up some plot holes, while at the same time continuing this crazy storyline and keeping everybody engaged and interested, while at the same time creating more mysteries and questions to keep the storyline going for future installments. That was a hell of a burden that fell on Jason Blundell's shoulders. Not only did he have to clean up somebody else's mess, he had to make it his own and make it as interesting as he possibly could. In order to do all that, he had to bring things like mythology, the multiverse, and time travel into the mix. So that's why Treyarch gets a pass for the sudden change of format in the Ether storyline, because there were basically two different people with two different mentalities trying to tell one story. And that's another reason why the Chaos story was born in the first place. Because Jason Blundell wants to be able to tell a story that is his own. And since he's learned from his and Jimmy Zielinski's past mistakes, he could really make it work. He could still make it complicated and convoluted, but now at least there won't be as many plot holes and continuity errors because now he has a long-term plan of where he wants to take the story in the future. In the Chaos story, it doesn't seem like the characters are trying to fight a giant zombies outbreak. It just seems like they're using time travel to go back in time and gather some sort of an item or an artifact or maybe even information, because from what we know so far, the characters are trying to find Scarlett's dad. The world as we know it is still safe and sound, and history is still pretty much the same as real history. These characters go back in time to when a certain historical event takes place, and they try to retrieve an artifact, and as soon as they're done, they teleport themselves back to the present, and that doesn't alter history. For example, they'll go back to the Titanic, pick up an artifact, then they go back to the present time. But the Titanic still sinks. What they do doesn't change anything. Another thing Jason Blundell mentioned in the interview is how our characters could possibly die, and again, that wouldn't alter history either. The characters could go back to the Titanic and die there, and the Titanic would still sink. Now going back to the main topic of the video, why do we see our characters die in the gameplay trailer for 9? The answer is, whatever takes place in 9 has a very clear beginning and an end. Whatever happens inside the Colosseum is contained and isolated from the rest of the world. And at the end of it, the zombies somehow will be gone, and they will not affect the outside world, which means that our characters could very well die inside this map, and it wouldn't change anything. We see our characters die inside this trailer because Jason Blundell was basically trying to put an emphasis on that point. One more thing that people are comparing this to is when we see our characters die in some of the Black Ops 3 Zombies trailers. For example, there was a Zetsubo no Shima music video that we got before the map was released on Xbox One and PC, and in that trailer, we see our characters die. There's a shot of Takeo staring at Richtofen's dead body, and there is another shot of him looking at Dempsey's and Nikolai's corpses. To me, it always felt like in those scenes, Takeo was just hallucinating, and it was just Treyarch's way of showcasing that. Because there's a hallucination Easter egg in Zetsubo no Shima, and the trailer was just kind of showcasing that while at the same time trying to tell the audience that these characters care about each other. Because Takeo sees his friends die, and that takes an emotional toll on him. We don't really see that in the 9 trailer. Shaw gets stabbed and his body is thrown in a ditch and his friends aren't there. That scene wasn't done to provoke an emotional reaction, but the one in the Zetsubo no Shima trailer was. Plus, I don't feel like it's a good thing to compare gameplay trailers for two separate storylines as if they're from the same universe. Seeing main characters die in one trailer could mean one thing, and seeing that in another gameplay trailer could mean a completely different thing. So there you have it. That was my understanding of what we saw in the 9 trailer, and I did my best to try and explain it to you guys because I felt like Jason Blundell kind of answered that question in his interview with Game Informer, but everybody was kind of focused on Zombie Rush and other things he talked about that it kind of went under the radar, and also the way he explained it, it was just in a couple of sentences, so some people might not have understood what he meant. That is going to do it for today's video. Let me know in the comment section down below what your interpretation of the 9 trailer was. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.